In the dying Nevada town of Dry Creek Junction, a broke travel blogger was about to break open a wall that powerful people had protected with murder for 3 decades. What started as a desperate attempt to salvage her failing career took a shocking turn when she came face to face with 7 wooden crates stamped "Do Not Open" and the skeletal remains of men who'd asked too many questions. Lydia Cross wasn't your typical urban explorer with a camera. For 5 years, she had spent her life documenting America's forgotten corners, known for her relentless curiosity and her refusal to accept the stories everyone else believed. When she encountered a dusty envelope marked "Do Not Reopen" hidden behind a ticket counter, she had no idea she was walking into a conspiracy that stretched from state officials to small-town sheriffs. Lydia made a choice that would lead to shootouts in underground tunnels, federal raids, and the exposure of $28 million in stolen highway funds that had been buried alongside the bodies of 4 construction workers. What began as a 30-cent property auction would become the biggest corruption scandal in Nevada history. The town of Dry Creek Junction would never be the same after one woman chose to tear down the walls instead of walking away wealthy and silent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The county clerk said I overpaid 30 cents for an entire bus terminal, and apparently I could have gotten it for less. She slid the deed across her desk like she was passing me a losing lottery ticket, her expression somewhere between pity and amusement. I didn't understand the joke yet. I would. "You're sure about this?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. There's still time to back out. But I was past the point of backing out. My savings account had exactly 80.37 torrens left in it. My apartment lease had ended 6 weeks ago. Everything I owned fit in the back of a van that was currently making a concerning rattling noise every time I went above 40 miles per hour. The travel vlog that was supposed to be my big break had exactly 23 subscribers, most of whom hadn't watched a video in months. So no, I wasn't sure about anything anymore. But I was tired of being nowhere, documenting nothing, and hoping someone would care. "I'm sure," I said, signing my name on the dotted line. Dry Creek Junction looked like a place that time had forgotten on purpose. The main street was 2 blocks long. Half the storefronts had dusty windows with faded "For Rent" signs that looked older than me. The other half seemed to be hanging on through sheer stubbornness. A hardware store, a diner, a garage with a hand-painted sign that read "Trans Auto Repair," and at the far end of town, standing alone like a monument to something nobody wanted to remember, the bus terminal. I'd seen pictures online when I researched the property, black and white photos from the 1960s, showing gleaming tile floors and crowds of people with suitcases, waiting for buses that connected this nowhere town to somewhere. Color photos from the 1980s showing peeling paint and fewer people, and then nothing. No photos after the last buses stopped running a decade ago, according to the county records. But something about that timeline felt wrong. The building looked like it had been abandoned for much longer than 10 years. I parked outside the diner first. I'd learned that small towns ran on gossip and coffee, and if you wanted to understand a place, you started with the locals who had nowhere else to be at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. 3 people sat at the counter, 2 older men in flannel shirts and a woman with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun. They all turned to look at me at once, and their conversations died mid-sentence. "Just coffee," I said to the waitress, sliding onto a stool. "And maybe a slice of whatever pie you recommend." The waitress, whose name tag read Donna, poured coffee without meeting my eyes. "Apples fresh. Perfect." I waited for the normal small-town curiosity. "Where are you from?" "Just passing through." But nobody asked. The 2 men went back to their conversation in voices too low to hear. The gray-haired woman paid her bill and left without glancing my way again. "I just bought the old bus terminal," I said finally, pulling out my camera and setting it on the counter. I'd gotten used to narrating my life for an audience that barely existed. Thought I'd document the restoration, turn it into a roadside cafe or something. Have you seen the building? The bones are solid. Donna set the pie down carefully. You're the one who won the auction. It wasn't a question. 30 cents. I tried to smile. Couldn't pass it up. One of the men at the counter made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. His companion elbowed him quiet. That building's been empty a long time, Donna said, refilling my coffee, though I hadn't touched it yet. There's a reason for that. Bad location, bad memory. Before I could press for details, the bell above the door chimed again. The diner's atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone sat up straighter. Even Donna's hand stilled on the coffee pot. The man who entered wore a sheriff's uniform and a smile that didn't reach his eye. He was maybe 50, with the kind of weathered face that came from spending too much time in the Nevada sun. When he looked at me, I felt like I was being catalogued and filed away for future reference. You must be Miss Cross, he said, his voice slow and measured. Word travels fast in a small town. Lydia, I said, extending my hand. His grip was firm and cold. Sheriff Wade Holcomb. Welcome to Dry Creek Junction. He released my hand and gestured to the stool beside me. Mind if I join you? I did mind, but I nodded anyway. He ordered coffee. We sat in silence while Donna poured it. The other customers had suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere and were filing out, leaving exact change on the counter without waiting for receipts. So you bought the terminal, Wade said finally. Is that a problem? Not a problem. Just surprising. Most people who come here take one look at that place and keep driving. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, studying me over the rim of his cup. I suppose you're not. Travel blogger, right? I saw your post about the auction. Of course he had. I'd made it public thinking it might generate some interest. Some views. Something to prove I hadn't given up entirely. I document forgotten places, I said. America's abandoned corners. The stories nobody tells anymore. Some stories aren't forgotten, Wade said quietly. They're just better left alone. What does that mean? He set down his cup and turned to face me fully. His expression remained pleasant, but his eyes had gone flat and cold. Old structures can be dangerous. Rotting floors. Weak foundations, bad wiring. I'd hate for you to get hurt exploring a building that's been empty for so long. I'll be careful. I'm sure you will. But sometimes careful isn't enough. He stood, leaving a $5 bill on the counter. Stop by my office before you start any work on that property. There are permits you'll need. Regulations. We like to keep things safe in Dry Creek Junction. He was gone before I could respond. The bell above the door sounding almost accusatory as it chimed. Donna refilled my coffee again without being asked. He's right about one thing, she said softly. That building isn't safe, but not for the reasons he told you. I drove to the terminal as the afternoon sun slanted toward evening. The building sat at the edge of town, where the last houses gave way to empty desert. It was larger than I'd expected. 2 stories of weathered concrete and glass, with a distinctive mid-century modern design that must have looked futuristic in 1964. Now, it just looked forgotten. As I parked, I noticed something move near the corner of the building. A dog, rust-colored and lean, with intelligent eyes that watched me approach. He didn't bark or run. He just sat there, as if he'd been waiting. "Hey, buddy," I said, holding out my hand. "You live here?" The dog sniffed my fingers carefully, then returned his attention to the building, guarding it, or maybe guarding me from it. I pulled the key from my pocket. The metal felt heavier than it should, like it carried more than just the weight of iron. The lock turned smoothly, too smoothly for a building that had supposedly been abandoned for a decade. The door opened with a groan that echoed across the empty parking lot. The dog, who I'd already started thinking of as Rusty, stood and moved closer. not following me inside, but positioning himself where he could see both me and the desert behind us. "Some guard dog you are," I muttered. But as I stepped inside, I understood his hesitation. The air was wrong. Not just stale, but heavy, thick, like the building had been holding its breath for years and didn't know how to exhale. The last of the daylight filtered through broken blinds, casting stripes across the waiting room. Rows of molded plastic chairs faced a departure board that still listed destinations: Reno, Las Vegas, San Francisco, times frozen at 3:17 p.m. All of them, every clock in the visible waiting area showed 3:17. I pulled out my camera and started recording, narrating by habit. Inside the Dry Creek Junction terminal for the first time. The place is like a time capsule. Everything stopped at once. Look at those clocks. My voice sounded too loud in the empty space. I lowered my tone. Something happened here. Something that made everyone walk away and never come back. Behind me, Rusty whined softly. When I turned, he was standing in the doorway, refusing to cross the threshold. His ears were flat against his skull, and he was staring at something in the shadows to my left. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. Just the ticket counter, just the shadows, just the feeling that I was not alone. I didn't sleep well in the motel that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those clocks. 3:17, 3:17. I'd searched online for historical accidents or incidents in Dry Creek Junction, but found nothing. No articles, no news reports. It was as if the town had simply decided to stop existing in any meaningful way. After the mid-1990s, by 7 a.m. I was back at the terminal with fresh coffee and a toolbox I'd borrowed from the motel manager. Rusty was already there, sleeping near the entrance like he'd never left. He opened one eye when I approached, then went back to sleep. "Good morning to you too," I said. The building looked less ominous in daylight. Just old, just abandoned. The shadows that had seemed so threatening the evening before were now just shadows. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the heaviness in the air. Almost. I spent the first hour exploring the ground floor systematically, documenting everything with my camera. The waiting room, the restrooms with their vintage pink tile, a small employee break room with a refrigerator door hanging open, the interior long since dried out and empty, a maintenance closet with shelves of cleaning supplies that had turned to sludge in their bottles, everything covered in dust, everything silent, but not everything untouched. In the employee break room, I found a coffee cup sitting on the counter. The coffee inside had long since evaporated, leaving a dark ring at the bottom, but there was no dust on the cup. None at all. Someone had been here recently. Recently enough that dust hadn't had time to settle. I picked up the cup carefully, examining it. Plain white ceramic. No identifying marks. I set it back down exactly where I'd found it and continued exploring. The ticket counter was behind a wall of clouded glass. A door marked "Employees Only" hung half open on broken hinges. I pushed through into the office space behind the counter. This was where the real business of the terminal had happened. Desks with ancient typewriters, filing cabinets with drawers pulled open, and a wall calendar from December 1995, the last month circled in red marker with the words "Final Run" written across it. So the terminal had closed in 1995, 29 years ago, but the county clerk had said the buses stopped running 10 years ago. Someone was lying, or someone didn't know the truth. I crouched down behind the main counter, examining the space where tickets would have been sold. The counter itself was solid wood, built into the floor, but when I pressed on one of the panels, it moved slightly. Not broken, hidden. I ran my fingers along the edges and found a small latch, almost invisible in the wood grain. When I pressed it, a panel popped open with a soft click that made me jump. Inside the hidden compartment was a metal box, not locked, not rusted, just sitting there waiting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were three things: a ring of old bus keys, still shiny like they'd been oiled recently, a maintenance log from 1994, the entries ending abruptly in August, and an envelope, yellowed with age, with words written across the front in fading ink. "Do not reopen." I should have listened. I should have put the envelope back, closed the compartment and walked away. But I'd never been good at leaving mysteries alone. That was why my travel vlog existed in the first place. I chased the stories everyone else had forgotten. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, a memo dated August 15. The letterhead read, Nevada State Highway Department. The memo itself was short. Project Sundown complete. Final transfer scheduled for 3:17 p.m., December 31. All personnel to be reassigned. Facility to be decommissioned and sealed. No records to remain on site. Confirm receipt. Below the typed text, someone had written in pen, "They know. Cancel everything. Destroy this." But they hadn't destroyed it. They'd hidden it, waiting for someone to find it. A sound made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere above me. The terminal had 2 floors. I hadn't been upstairs yet. I stood carefully, tucking the envelope into my jacket pocket. The footsteps continued, crossing directly over my head. Too heavy to be rusty, too rhythmic to be the building settling. Someone else was here. I moved toward the stairs at the back of the office, my camera still recording in my hand. The stairwell was dark. Emergency lighting that had once illuminated the steps was long dead. I used my phone's flashlight, climbing carefully. The second floor was administrative offices. Doors lined both sides of a narrow hallway. Most stood open, revealing empty rooms stripped of everything valuable. But one door at the end of the hall was closed, and from beneath it I could see a sliver of light. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded thin and scared. The light went out. The footsteps started again, faster now, moving toward the back of the building, away from me. I ran down the hallway, my heart hammering. The closed door was locked when I tried the handle, but through the frosted glass window I could see a shadow moving. Someone was still in there. "I know you're there," I said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." No response, just the sound of something heavy being moved, dragged across the floor. Then silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2. When nothing happened, I pressed my ear against the door. No sound. No movement. Nothing. I tried the handle again, putting my shoulder against the door. It held firm. Whatever was on the other side wasn't going to let me in. By the time I made it back downstairs, my hands were shaking and my breath was coming too fast. Rusty was standing in the doorway, alert now. His hackles were raised, and he was staring up at the second floor like he could see through the ceiling. "You heard it too, didn't you?" I asked. He whined softly and pressed against my leg. Not aggressive, protective. I was reviewing the footage on my camera when Sheriff Wade Holcomb appeared. No car, pulling up. No sound of approach. He was just suddenly there, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and that same pleasant smile that made my skin crawl. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was driving by, saw your..." He stepped inside without invitation, his eyes scanning the waiting room. "Making progress?" "Just getting a feel for the place." His gaze lingered on the ticket counter, on the half-open door to the employee area. Could he tell I'd been inside, that I'd found the hidden compartment? "Find anything interesting?" he asked. "Just dust and broken furniture." "Good." He looked at me then, and his smile had vanished. "That's all there is to find here. Trust me, you've been inside before." It wasn't a question. I saw the truth in the way his jaw tightened. "Like I said yesterday," Wade continued, "old buildings can be dangerous. Weak floors, structural damage. I'd hate for you to fall through a rotted board and get hurt, especially when you're here alone." The threat was barely veiled. Rusty growled low in his throat. Wade glanced at the dog. I'd keep that animal under control if I were you. Animal control gets complaints. They have to respond, and strays in this county usually end up at the shelter. He turned back to me, which doesn't have a great track record for adoption. He was gone before I could respond, but this time I heard his car start. Heard the engine fade as he drove back toward town. I looked down at Rusty. Looks like it's just you and me against whatever's happening here, buddy. Rusty wagged his tail once, then walked over to the far wall, the one that separated the waiting room from the employee area. He stopped at a specific spot and started scratching at the baseboard. What is it? He scratched harder, his claws scraping against plaster. I knelt beside him and tapped the wall where he was focused. The sound that came back was wrong. Not the dull thud of solid wall. A hollow echo, like there was empty space behind the plaster. Good boy, I whispered. Very good boy. I pressed my ear against the wall and knocked again. Definitely hollow, and if I listened carefully, very carefully, I could hear something else. A soft mechanical hum. Distant, like machinery running somewhere deep beneath the building. Something was still alive in this abandoned terminal. Something hidden in the walls. And I was going to find out what. My van had been making an ominous grinding noise since I'd arrived in Dry Creek Junction. I'd been ignoring it because I couldn't afford to fix it. But that morning, as I drove from the motel to get breakfast, the grinding turned into a shriek of tortured metal that made pedestrians stop and stare. I limped into the parking lot of Trans-Auto Repair, and the van gave one final shudder before dying completely. Perfect, I muttered, climbing out. Absolutely perfect. The garage was open. Its bay door rolled up to reveal a space that was surprisingly clean and organized. Tool chests lined one wall. A lift held an old pickup truck in mid-service, and standing beneath it, wiping grease from her hands, was a woman who looked like she could disassemble and rebuild an engine without breaking a sweat. That doesn't sound good, she called out, nodding toward my van. It's been making that sound for 3 days. And you kept driving it? I was hoping it would get better on its own. She laughed, a sharp bark of sound. Yeah, that's not how engines work. She walked over, still wiping her hands. Rosie Tran, let's see what you've done to this poor vehicle. I popped the hood. Rosie leaned in, poked around for less than 30 seconds, and stood back up, shaking her head. Your transmission's about to fall out. Can you fix it? Can I fix it? Sure. Can you afford it? That's a different question. I explained my financial situation in as few words as possible. Rosie listened, then sighed. Tell you what, I'll patch it well enough to keep it running for a while. Call it 200. You can pay me when you get your first customers at that cafe you're planning. How did you know about that? Small town. Everybody knows everything. She paused. Well, almost everything. There was weight in those last words. I recognized the opening when I heard it. You knew about the terminal, I said. Before I bought it, everybody did, but Wattie wanted it. Not for 30 cents. Not for free. She grabbed a creeper and rolled under my van. Her voice came out muffled. There's a reason that building's been sitting empty for 30 years. Sheriff Holcomb said it was dangerous. Structural damage. Sheriff Holcomb says a lot of things. Tools clinked against metal. Most of them are true enough, but not the whole truth. I crouched down so I could see her face. What's the whole truth? She was quiet for a long moment, working. Then she slid out from under the van and sat up, meeting my eyes directly. My brother Daniel worked construction. Good with his hands. Quiet guy. In 1995, the state hired a crew to do renovations on the terminal, some kind of expansion project. Daniel was part of that crew. She stood, wiping her hands again even though they were already clean. A nervous habit. He went to work one day in November. November 17, 1995. He never came home. What happened? Nobody knows. Or nobody's saying. Sheriff said he probably took off. Wanted a fresh start. But Daniel wouldn't do that. He had a daughter. She was 6. He wouldn't just leave her. Did they investigate? Wood telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They investigated enough to close the case. Runaway adult. No sign of foul play. End of story. Rosie's jaw tightened, except 3 other guys from that crew also vanished over the next 6 weeks. Different days, different circumstances, but all gone. And the terminal closed down right after the last one disappeared. December 31, 1995. Closed permanently. 3:17 p.m. All the clocks stopped at 3:17 p.m. You think something happened during the renovation, I said. I think they found something they weren't supposed to find. Or they saw something they weren't supposed to see. And someone made sure they couldn't talk about it. She walked over to her workbench and started organizing tools that were already organized. Not looking at me. When she spoke again, her voice was rough. Sheriff Holcomb's grandfather was the project foreman for that renovation. Wade Holcomb Sr. He died in 1998. Heart attack, officially, but my mom always said he looked like a man who'd stopped sleeping. Like something was eating him up from the inside. I thought about the memo I'd found. Project Sundown. A completion date that matched the terminal's closure. And that handwritten note. They know. Cancel everything. I found something, I said quietly. In the terminal, hidden in the ticket counter. Rosie turned. What kind of something? I pulled out the envelope and handed it to her. She read the memo twice, her expression hardening. Project Sundown, she said. Never heard of it, but if the State Highway Department was involved, there'll be records. Somewhere. Where? Kerr House has some old construction permits in their archives. But if this memo says no records were supposed to remain on site, someone might have scrubbed the official files too. She thought for a moment. There's one person who might know. Marjorie Holcomb, the sheriff's mother. She was the town librarian back then. If anyone kept records they weren't supposed to keep, it would be her. Will she talk to me? Maybe. If you ask the right questions. If you make her understand you're not going to let this go. Rosie handed the memo back. Be careful with her. She's old now, sick, but she's sharp, and she's been carrying secrets for a long time. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Rosie went back to my van. I'll have this done by end of day, she said. In the meantime, you need blueprints of that building. Original plans. Not the ones they filed with the county after the renovation. The real ones from when it was first built. Where would I find those? County records. Ask for building permits filed between 1960 and 1965. Terminal construction started in 63. She paused, half under my van again. And Lydia, if you're going to keep digging into this, you're going to need help. Someone who knows this town. Someone the sheriff can't intimidate. Are you offering? Maybe. If you're serious about finding out what happened to my brother. She slid all the way under the van. And if you hear something breathing down there in the terminal basement, don't assume it's the wind. Down there, there's a basement, but Rosie didn't answer. She was already deep into repairing my transmission. The sound of metal tools on metal drowning out any chance of further conversation. I walked back to the motel, taking the long way through town. Dry Creek Junction felt different now. The quiet streets weren't peaceful. They were watchful. Every window I passed seemed to hide someone looking out. Every store I walked by went silent as I approached. They all knew I'd bought the terminal, and they were all waiting to see what would happen next. That afternoon, I went to the county courthouse and requested the original building permits for the bus terminal. The clerk, a different woman from the one who'd sold me the deed, disappeared into the archives and came back 20 minutes later empty-handed. Can't find them, she said. The 1960s files are incomplete. Lots of documents went missing during a flood in '89. There was a flood in Nevada in 1989. She didn't meet my eyes. That's what the records say. I left the courthouse and drove back to the terminal. Rusty was waiting, as always. This time he didn't hesitate at the threshold. He walked straight inside, headed directly to the wall he'd been scratching, and sat down, waiting for me to do something about it. I pulled out the envelope again and reread the memo. Project Sundown complete. Whatever they'd been doing, they'd finished it, and they'd hidden the evidence. But not all of it. Some of it was still here, behind the walls, beneath the floors. I took out my phone and called Rosie. "I need you to teach me how to safely remove a section of wall," I said. There was a pause. Then Rosie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? Daniel deserves the truth, and I need to know why the sheriff keeps warning me away from a building I own." "All right, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Bring your camera. If we win something, you're going to want it documented." She hung up. I looked at Rusty. "Last chance to be the reasonable one and tell me this is a bad idea," I said. Rusty wagged his tail and scratched at the wall again. "Yeah," I said. "That's what I thought." As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows through the empty waiting room, I stood with my hand flat against the hollow wall and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. But I also thought about Daniel Tran, who'd gone to work one day and never came home. About 3 other men who'd vanished into nothing. About a terminal that closed down exactly when the memo said it would. About 30 years of silence and secrets. About a building that everyone in town was afraid to enter. "Some walls aren't built to hold us in," I whispered, recording myself for whatever audience might someday watch this footage. "They're built to hold the truth until someone's brave enough to break them open." I was about to find out what truth this building had been holding, and whether I was brave enough to face it. Rosie arrived with a toolbox and a crowbar. No questions, no hesitation, just the grim determination of someone who'd been waiting 30 years for this moment. "Show me," she said. I led her to the wall. Rusty was still sitting there, patient as stone. In the fading light, through the dusty windows, the waiting room felt like a cathedral, sacred and terrible at once. Rosie tapped the wall in several places, listening, definitely hollow. About 3 feet of empty space, I'd guess. Could be a utility chase, could be something else. She looked at me. Last chance to walk away. Not walking away. She nodded and handed me safety glasses. "Then let's see what your dog found." The first swing of the crowbar cracked the plaster. Dust exploded into the air, making us both cough. Rusty retreated to the doorway but didn't leave. Still watching, still guarding. We worked carefully, removing chunks of wall and stacking them aside. The plaster was old and brittle, crumbling easily under our hands. Behind it was brick. And behind the brick, darkness. "There's definitely a space back here," Rosie said, peering through the gap we'd created. She shone her flashlight inside. "Jesus. What? What is it?" She didn't answer, just widened the hole until we could both fit through. The space behind the wall was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide. It ran the length of the waiting room, parallel to the main wall, and stacked along one side, wrapped in heavy canvas and sealed with wax, were wooden crates. I counted 7, each one about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, stamped on the side in faded black letters, "State Materials 1964, do not open." "This is it," I whispered. "This is what Project Sundown was hiding." Rosie was already working on the seal of the nearest crate. The wax cracked easily, old and brittle. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth packets, were stacks of money, $100 bills, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. "Holy shit," Rosie breathed. I pulled out my camera with shaking hands and started recording. We're inside a hidden space in the wall of the Dry Creek Junction bus terminal. We've found what appear to be 7 crates of cash. Currency looks like it's from the 1960s. All wrapped and sealed. Rosie opened another crate. More money. She opened a third. The same. "How much do you think is here?" I asked. "I don't know. Millions. Maybe more." She sat back on her heels. This is what they killed for. This is why Daniel died. I was about to respond when Rusty started barking. Not his normal bark, a warning, sharp and urgent. We scrambled back through the hole into the waiting room. Through the broken blinds, I saw headlights. A vehicle pulling into the parking lot, stopping. "Kill the lights," Rosie hissed. We dove for our flashlights, plunging the terminal into darkness. The headlights outswept across the windows, then went dark. An engine cut off. A car door opened and closed quietly. Someone was here, and they weren't announcing themselves. We crouched behind the ticket counter, barely breathing. Rusty had gone silent, but I could hear him growling low in his throat. Footsteps crunched across the gravel outside, slow, deliberate, circling the building. They were checking to see if anyone was inside. My heart hammered so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The footsteps stopped at the main entrance. A pause. Then the door handle rattled. I'd locked it. Thank God I'd locked it. The footsteps moved away, circling back toward the parking lot. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door open again. The engine started. The vehicle pulled away. We waited 10 more minutes before either of us moved. "That was Wade," Rosie said finally. "Had to be. How do you know?" "Because everyone else in this town is too scared to come here after dark." She stood carefully, peering through the blinds. "He's gone. For now." We sealed the wall back up as best we could, piling the broken plaster to hide the hole. It wouldn't stand up to close inspection, but in the darkness, it might buy us time. "We can't leave the money here," I said. "He knows we found something. He'll come back. We can't move it either. Not 7 crates, not without help." Rosie checked her watch. "It's almost midnight. We need to think this through." But we didn't have time to think, because as we stood there arguing in whispers, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll end up like the others." I showed it to Rosie. Her face went pale. "We need to call the police," she said. "Wade Holcomb is the police. Then we need to call someone else. Federal authorities, FBI, someone. And tell them what? That we found money in a wall? They'll ask questions, want to know how we found it, whether we broke any laws, opening those crates." I paced the length of the waiting room. We need proof, not just of the money, of why it's here, of who put it there, of what happened to Daniel and the others. How do we get that? I thought about the memo, about Marjorie Holcomb, the librarian, who'd kept records she wasn't supposed to keep, about a town built on secrets and silence. "We find out what Project Sundown really was," I said, "and we make sure everyone knows the truth." I woke the next morning to pounding on my motel room door. For a terrified moment, I thought it was Wade, but the voice that called through the door was younger, confident. "Lydia Cross, my name is Elliot Graves. I'm a reporter with the Reno Gazette-Journal. I'd like to talk to you about your bus terminal." I opened the door with the chain still attached. A man in his mid-30s stood there, dark hair, sharp eyes, holding a press credential. He looked like someone who'd built a career on being exactly where he wasn't supposed to be. "How did you find me?" I asked. "You posted about the terminal auction on social media. I've been following the story of state infrastructure corruption in Nevada for 2 years. When I saw that post, I knew I had to talk to you. I haven't found anything newsworthy, really." He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. My social media post from yesterday evening. A blurry photo I'd uploaded of the terminal's interior, with the caption, "Day 2 of exploring this forgotten piece of Nevada history. Starting to understand why everyone wanted to forget it." That post got flagged by someone in the State Archives Department, Elliot said. "They tried to get it removed, said it contained sensitive historical information, but by then I'd already seen it. and anything the state wants removed is something I want to investigate. I studied him through the gap in the door. Reporter, that meant he wanted a story, and stories meant exposure, which could be protection, or it could be a death sentence. Give me 10 minutes, I said. We met at the diner. Donna poured coffee without comment, but I saw her glance at Elliot's press credentials. By lunch, everyone in town would know a reporter was asking questions. Tell me about Project Sundown, Elliot said once Donna had left. I hadn't mentioned that name to anyone except Rosie. How do you know that term? Because I've seen it before. In a leaked memo from someone sent it to my editor anonymously 3 years ago. We couldn't verify it, couldn't find any supporting documentation, so we didn't run the story. He pulled out a folder and slid a photocopy across the table, but I never forgot it. It was the same memo I'd found, word for word. Where did you find your copy? He asked. Inside the terminal, hidden in the ticket counter. Elliot leaned back, processing, so there are at least 2 copies, which means someone wanted this found. Someone who knew what was happening but couldn't speak openly, or someone who's dead now, possibly. He pulled out a notebook. What else have you found? I made a decision. Right or wrong, I made it. Money, millions of dollars, hidden in the walls. Currency from the 1960s, all labeled as state materials. To his credit, Elliot didn't look shocked, just nodded slowly. Highway funds. They were embezzling highway funds. How did you know? Because in 1964, Nevada received $47 million in federal money for interstate construction. By 1966, they'd only accounted for $19 million. The rest vanished into vague line items and contractor payments. It was the biggest financial scandal in state history, except nobody could prove where the money went. He tapped the memo, because they hid it, and built a bus terminal to launder it. How does that work? You inflate construction costs. A project that costs $2 million, you say costs $6 million. The extra $4 million goes into secret accounts or secret walls. You do that across dozens of projects, and suddenly $28 million in missing highway funds makes sense. 28 million. 7 crates. 4 million per crate. The math worked. We need to document everything, I said. Photos, serial numbers, chain of evidence. We need to do it before Sheriff Holcomb destroys the evidence. We returned to the terminal together, Elliot carrying professional camera equipment. Rusty greeted us at the door and Elliot stopped. That's the dog, he said, the one the locals talk about. They say he's been here for years. He's helping me. He's keeping watch. There's a difference. We were halfway through photographing the first crate when I heard it. A car engine. Close. Getting closer. Someone's coming, I said. We shoved the crates back, sealed the wall as quickly as possible. Not enough time. Not nearly enough time. Sheriff Wade Holcomb's voice echoed through the terminal. Miss Cross, I saw your van. Just checking in. Elliot and I froze on opposite sides of the wall gap. Wade's footsteps moved through the waiting room. Measured. Searching. Miss Cross, you here? I stepped out from behind the ticket counter, brushing dust from my clothes. Right here, Sheriff. Wade's eyes moved past me, scanning the room, looking for what was different, what was wrong. Making progress? He asked. Slow going, lots of structural issues. I noticed you have company. He nodded toward Elliot's camera bag visible near the door. News crew. Just a friend, helping with documentation. Wade's smile never reached his eyes. Good to have help, but be careful who you trust in this town. Not everyone is who they seem. He left, but we both knew he'd seen too much, suspected too much. That night I found an envelope shoved under my motel door. Inside, a single piece of paper. Marjorie Holcomb lived in a house at the edge of town that looked like it was sinking into the desert. Peeling paint, sagging porch, windows covered with yellowed curtains. But the garden was immaculate, roses blooming despite the harsh Nevada sun. I knocked 3 times before she answered. The woman who opened the door was tiny and ancient, but her eyes were sharp. Green eyes, like her son's. "You're the girl who bought the terminal," she said. "Not a question, Lydia Cross." "Yes, ma'am. I wondered how long it would take you to find me." She stepped aside. "Come in. We don't have much time." Her living room was filled with books, stacked on shelves, piled on tables, covering every available surface. The smell of old paper and dust hung thick in the air. "I was the town librarian for 40 years, Marjorie said, settling into a worn armchair. "People think librarians just catalogue books, but we catalogue secrets too. We remember the things people want to forget." "I need to know about Project Sundown," she smiled, but it was sad. "Of course you do. Everyone who touches that building eventually asks the same question." She gestured to a box beside her chair. "I've been keeping these for someone like you. Someone brave enough to ask." Inside the box were construction documents, financial ledgers, photographs, all related to the bus terminal. "My husband was the project foreman," Marjorie said quietly. "He thought he was building something important, a hub that would keep Dry Creek Junction alive. But halfway through construction, men from the state came, offered him more money, much more money. All he had to do was look the other way while they installed some special features in the building, the hidden spaces in the walls. Yes, they told him it was for secure document storage, emergency facilities. He didn't ask questions. The money was too good." Her hands trembled slightly. "But then workers started disappearing. First one, then another. My husband realized they were eliminating anyone who knew too much about what they'd built. He didn't stop them. He tried. He went to the county sheriff. But the sheriff was already paid off. So my husband did the only thing he could. He documented everything. Every payment, every contractor, every hidden space they built. He kept records." She handed me a key, small, brass, old, storage locker 47, in the terminal basement. That's where he hid the master ledger, the complete accounting of Project Sundown. Names, dates, amounts, proof of everything. She leaned forward. "My son doesn't know it exists. Nobody does. I was supposed to destroy it after my husband died, but I couldn't. Some truths are too important to erase." "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I'm dying. Cancer. Maybe 3 months left. And because my son has become what his father tried to stop. Wade protects the secret because he thinks it protects the town. But secrets like this don't protect anything. They poison everything they touch." Her green eyes filled with tears. "Find that ledger. Expose the truth. Let this town finally breathe again." I left Marjorie's house with the key burning a hole in my pocket. By the time I reached the terminal, Rosie was already there. I'd called her from the car. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "Marjorie Holcomb gave me a key to a storage locker in the basement. She says there's a ledger inside, complete records of the embezzlement. The terminal has a basement? Apparently. We found the access door behind the ticket counter. Locked. But the old lock gave way easily to Rosie's tools. The stairs descended into darkness that smelled of earth and rust and something else. Something wrong. Our flashlights carved tunnels through the black. The basement was larger than the building above it. Much larger. It stretched away in both directions, supported by old concrete pillars. And along the walls, dozens of storage lockers with rusted metal doors. "This doesn't make sense," Rosie said. "Why would a bus terminal need this much storage?" "It wasn't for storage. Look." I pointed to tracks in the floor. Old rail lines, barely visible beneath layers of dust. "They were planning a subway," I whispered, "or a freight system. This was supposed to be more than a terminal." We found locker 47 near the back. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a leather satchel, remarkably well preserved. And inside the satchel, a ledger bound in black leather, page after page of neat handwriting. Names, amounts, dates, a complete record of 30 years of theft and murder. This is it, I breathed. This is what they've been hiding. That's when Rosie's light caught something else, scratched into the concrete wall beside the locker. Fresh scratches. A name. Rosie's hand trembled as she traced her brother's name. The letters were crude, carved with something sharp, desperate. I watched her face cycle through emotions too complex to name. He was here, she whispered. He made it this far. Rosie, don't. She stood abruptly, her flashlight beam jerking wildly. We need to search this entire basement. If he left his name, he left other signs, other messages. We split up, each taking a section of the vast underground space. My flashlight revealed decades of abandonment, broken equipment, collapsed ceiling sections, and everywhere, that feeling of wrongness, of something terrible that had happened here. I found the first work badge 20 feet from Daniel's name, clipped to a beam, half buried in rubble. The plastic was cracked, but readable. Martin Reeves, contractor. Rosie, I called. I found something. She appeared beside me, breathing hard. Looked at the badge. Martin Reeves. He was one of the men who disappeared 3 days before Daniel. We kept searching, found 2 more badges, 2 more names, all men who'd vanished during the renovation. And then we found where they'd been working when they disappeared. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall. Someone had tried to seal it with concrete, but the job was rushed, sloppy. We could see the seam where old concrete met new. They found something, Rosie said. Down there, whatever Project Sundown was really hiding. Should we call someone? Who? Wade? The state police who've been covering this up for 30 years? She grabbed the crowbar from her toolkit. We're already here. We're already in danger. Might as well bin out what they died for. The concrete was old and broke apart under repeated strikes. Behind it, the tunnel descended steeply. Rail tracks ran down the center, disappearing into darkness. We descended carefully, testing each step. The air grew colder, damper, wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The tunnel opened into a chamber, natural cave system, expanded and reinforced with concrete. And stacked throughout the chamber were more crates, dozens of them, all with the same stamping, state materials. But these weren't sealed. These were open, empty. Someone had already retrieved the money from down here. This was the original hiding place, I said. They moved it later, put some of it in the walls upstairs. Why move it? Because they were about to seal this chamber, bury the evidence, and anyone who knew about it. We found Daniel's work badge near the chamber entrance, and beside it, barely visible in the dust, were bones. Not a complete skeleton, just scattered remains, mixed with collapsed ceiling sections and rusted metal. The official story would call it a construction accident. Tragic cave-in, but we knew better. This was murder, made to look like negligence. Rosie knelt beside the bones, her flashlight steady despite her shaking hands. This could be him, could be any of them. We need to call this in. Federal authorities, anthropologist, someone who can identify a sound echoed through the tunnel. Footsteps, coming from above, and a voice calling down through the darkness. Lydia, I know you're down there. We need to talk. Wade Holcomb had found us. We looked at each other. The ledger was in Rosie's bag, the proof we needed, but we were trapped in a tunnel with one exit, and Wade was blocking it. Stay calm, I whispered. We're not doing anything illegal. This is my property. He killed them, Rosie hissed. Or his family did. You think he'll let us walk out with proof? Wade's footsteps descended. His flashlight beam appeared at the tunnel mouth. He moved slowly, carefully. Not threatening, not yet. When he reached the chamber, he stopped, looked around at the empty crates, at the bones, at us. You shouldn't be down here, he said. His voice was tired, defeated. Nobody should be down here. People deserve to know what happened. I said. What happened was a long time ago. Different people, different times. Your grandfather, Wade flinched. My grandfather was trying to save this town. The highway money was already stolen. He didn't steal it, he trailed off. He just helped hide it. And when the workers found out, when they threatened to expose everything, yes, there was an accident. A terrible accident. Murder, Rosie said. You mean murder? I mean survival. This town was dying. The money kept it alive for 30 more years. Schools stayed open. Hospitals stayed staffed. All because of what my grandfather did. And the men who died, Rosie's voice was ice. My brother, what about their survival? Wade looked at the bones. Something in his expression cracked. I'm sorry, I am. But I can't let you leave with that ledger. You understand that, don't you? His hand moved to his service weapon, and that's when the tunnel began to shake. The tunnel shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Wade's hand froze on his weapon, as we all looked up at the groaning concrete above us. What did you touch? Wade demanded. What did you move? Nothing, I shouted over the rumbling. We just found. A crack split the ceiling. Not from age, from something else. Something deliberate. Wade's face went white. They're bringing it down. We need to get out. Now. Who's bringing it down? Rosie yelled. But Wade was already running back toward the tunnel entrance, his earlier threats forgotten in the face of immediate death. We followed, Rosie clutching the ledger to her chest as chunks of concrete began falling around us. The tunnel tilted. The old rail tracks buckled. Behind us, the chamber collapsed with a roar that sounded like the earth itself was screaming. We made it to the basement level as the tunnel entrance caved in. The three of us collapsed on the floor, gasping, covered in dust. Wade's flashlight had been knocked from his hand. In the darkness, I could hear him breathing hard. Your men, you ordered them to collapse the tunnel with us inside. No. Wade's voice was raw. I didn't. I wouldn't. Then who? Silence. Then Wade laughed. A broken, terrible sound. You don't understand. I was never in control. My grandfather started this. My father maintained it. I just inherited the cage. I fumbled for my phone. The camera was still recording. Had been recording since we entered the basement. I'd captured everything. Wade's confession, his admission about the murders, all of it. There are others, Wade continued in the darkness. People with much more to lose than a small-town sheriff. State officials, contractors who are still in business, families who built their fortunes on stolen money. He coughed. You think I'm the monster? I'm just the gird dog. And they just decided I'm as disposable as you are. We need to get out of here, Rosie said. If they collapse the tunnel, they might try to bring down the whole building. We climbed the stairs back to the main floor. The terminal was still standing, but barely cracks, spider-webbed, across the wall. Windows that had been intact were now shattered, and through the broken glass, I could see vehicles surrounding the building. 3 trucks, men standing beside them, watching, waiting. The back exit, Wade said. There's an old loading dock. It leads to a service alley. Why are you helping us? I asked. Because I'm tired. Because my mother is dying and she told me. He stopped, swallowed hard. She told me to let it end, to stop protecting ghosts. He looked at me directly for the first time. In the dim light, he looked ancient, broken. That ledger, you have proof? Rosie held it up. Good. Make sure it matters. Make sure everyone knows. He pulled his service weapon and handed it to me. Take this. You might need it more than I do. I don't want your gun. Take it anyway. Those men outside, they're not here to talk. The sound made us all freeze. Footsteps. On the second floor. The same footsteps I'd heard on my first day. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving toward the stairs. Who else is here? Rosie whispered. Wade's face had gone pale. No, he can't be. He's been dead for 20 years. Who? But I already knew. I'd known since I first found the hidden envelope. Since I first heard those phantom footsteps. Your father, I said. Wade Holcomb Sr. never died, did he? The old man who appeared at the top of the stairs was bent and withered, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He moved slowly, one hand on the railing, but there was nothing frail about the way he held the rifle in his other hand. "You should have left it buried," he said. His voice was smoke and gravel. "All of you, Dad." Wade's voice broke. "Mom said you died. She showed me the death certificate. Your mother lied to protect you, just like I lied to protect this town." The old man descended one step at a time. "I've been living in the walls of this building for 27 years, guarding what we built, making sure nobody found what they weren't supposed to find. The footsteps, the coffee cup without dust, the feeling of being watched. He'd been here all along." "You killed those workers," Rosie said. Her voice was shaking with rage. "My brother, Martin Reeves. The others, you murdered them. I protected a legacy, I protected a future." The old man reached the bottom of the stairs. "And I'll do it again." He raised the rifle. Wade moved before I could think, stepped between us and his father. "No, it's over. Let them go. Move aside, son." I said no. The rifle fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Wade staggered backward, clutching his chest. Red bloomed between his fingers. I didn't remember pulling the trigger on Wade's service weapon, but suddenly the old man was falling. The rifle clattered to the floor. Wade Sr. collapsed in the same waiting room where he'd sealed 4 men in a tomb 3 decades ago. Wade was on his knees, breathing in shallow gasps. I knelt beside him while Rosie checked his father. "Dead," she confirmed quietly. "Good," Wade whispered. Blood flecked his lips. Maybe now it can finally be over." "Stay with us," I said. "We'll get you help." But he was already fading. His hand found mine. Squeezed once. "Tell my mother. Tell her I finally did the right thing." He died there on the floor of the terminal he'd spent his life protecting. And as his eyes went empty, I heard something else. Sirens. Coming fast. Through the broken windows I saw the men by the trucks, scrambling to leave. Saw their vehicles peeling away. And in the distance, flashing lights. Elliot Graves burst through the front door, a woman in a federal badge beside him. "FBI," the woman announced. "Nobody move." I looked down at the gun in my hand, at Wade's body, at the chaos around us. "I have everything recorded," I said, holding up my phone. "All of it. Confessions, evidence, everything you need." Elliot knelt beside me, his camera already recording. Always the journalist, but his eyes were kind. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." The FBI took over the terminal immediately. Crime scene tape, evidence markers, agents in suits documenting everything we'd found. The ledger, the money in the walls, the collapsed tunnel, the bodies. They separated us for questioning. I spent 6 hours in an interview room at the county sheriff's office, now staffed by state police. I told them everything, showed them every video, every photo, every piece of evidence we'd collected. When they finally let me go, it was after midnight. Rosie was waiting outside, Rusty sitting beside her. "They're calling it the biggest corruption scandal in Nevada history," she said. 28 million in missing highway funds, multiple murders, cover-ups spanning 3 decades. "Did they find Daniel?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes. The forensic team identified him from dental records, and the other 3 men. They're all being brought home." We stood in silence for a moment. The desert night was cold, clear, 1,000,000 stars overhead in a sky that didn't care about human corruption or human grief. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we bury my brother properly, give him the memorial he deserved." She looked at me. "And you become famous. Every news outlet in the country is going to want this story." "I don't want to be famous." "Too late. You already are." She was right. By morning my phone was flooded with messages, interview requests, book deals, production companies wanting to make documentaries. My social media followers had exploded from 23 to over 100,000 overnight. Everyone wanted to know about the woman who bought a bus terminal for 30 cents and uncovered a $28 million secret. But all I could think about was Wade Holcomb, dying on the floor. About Marjorie Holcomb, who would have to bury her husband and son in the same week. About Daniel Tran and 3 other men who'd been forgotten in the walls of a building nobody wanted to remember. I went to see Marjorie. She was in the hospital now, her cancer having accelerated with the stress. She looked smaller than ever in the hospital bed, fragile, but her eyes were still sharp. "You found it," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am, and my husband, dead. He was living in the terminal. He's the one who I couldn't finish." "I know." She closed her eyes. "I always knew. I told everyone he died because I couldn't bear the truth, that he'd chosen to protect the secret over protecting his family." A tear slid down her weathered cheek. "And my son, he died protecting us. In the end, he did the right thing." She nodded slowly. "Then perhaps there's hope for all of us, even those of us who stayed silent too long." She reached for my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "The money," she said, "the 28 million, what will happen to it? It's evidence now, federal property. Eventually, it'll probably go back to the state." "No," her voice was fierce. "Don't let them take it. That money was stolen from the people of Nevada, from the towns that needed highways, from the communities that deserved infrastructure." She squeezed my hand harder. "Make them give it back, not to politicians, to the people, to places like Dry Creek Junction that have been dying slowly for 30 years. I'm not sure I have that kind of influence. You have the biggest microphone in America right now. Use it." She died 3 days later, quietly, in her sleep. The funeral was small. Most of the town stayed away, ashamed or afraid or both. But Rosie and I were there, and Elliot, and a handful of federal agents who'd grown to respect the old woman who'd finally told the truth. At the gravesite, I found a letter in my jacket pocket. Marjorie must have slipped it there when I visited. The handwriting was shaky but readable. "Dear Lydia, thank you for having the courage I lacked. Thank you for unburying what we couldn't. The weight of secrets is heavier than the weight of truth, even when truth costs everything. Use your voice. Tell the story not just of corruption, but of the people who were forgotten. Tell them about the towns that died while officials got rich. Tell them about the workers who disappeared and the families who never got answers. And tell them that sometimes the only way to heal is to tear down the walls and let the light in. With gratitude, Marjorie." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into my pocket. Around me, the desert wind whispered through the Joshua trees. Rusty pressed against my leg, warm and solid and real. "What are you going to do?" Elliot asked. He'd stayed in town documenting everything, writing the story that would win him awards and acclaim. "I'm going to do what she asked," I said. "I'm going to make sure this matters." 6 weeks later, I returned to Dry Creek Junction. The terminal was gone. Demolished by federal order after the structural damage from the tunnel collapse made it too dangerous to save. All that remained was a flat lot of broken concrete and desert dust. But something new was rising in its place. I parked and walked toward the construction site. Workers moved with purpose, building something that looked nothing like the old terminal, something open, transparent, a community center with walls of glass. Rosie emerged from a trailer marked Project Manager. "You came," she said, smiling. "You asked me to. What is all this? This is what $28 million looks like when it actually goes to the community." She gestured at the construction. Community center, medical clinic, library, recording studio for local artists. Everything this town needed and never got. How? You, your interviews, your campaign to make sure the money wasn't buried in bureaucracy again. Rosie pulled out her phone and showed me news articles, dozens of them. All about the Dry Creek Junction Recovery Project, federal funds, state restitution, private donations. You shamed them into doing the right thing. We shamed them, all of us. Fair enough. We walked through the construction site. Workers called out greetings. Some recognized me. Others just knew I was part of the story somehow. Part of the healing. At the center of the site, they'd installed a memorial, a simple stone wall with names carved into it. Daniel Tran, Martin Reeves, Joseph Chen, Harold Santos, the 4 men who died trying to expose the truth. The families came to the dedication, Rosie said quietly. Joseph's daughter, Harold's widow, They finally got closure, finally got to grieve properly. And you, I'm okay. Some days better than others, but I'm okay. She looked at the memorial. I'm running the project, making sure it's built right this time. No secrets, no shortcuts, just honest work. He'd be proud of you. I know. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the construction, watching something new being born from something that had rotted from the inside out. What about you? Rosie asked. I heard you turned down the Netflix deal, and the book advance, and like 6 different interview requests. I didn't want to profit from tragedy. People died. That's not entertainment. So what will you do? I pulled out my camera, my trusty old camera that had documented this entire journey. I'm going back to what I do, documenting forgotten places, telling stories that need to be told, but I'm doing it differently now. How so? I'm not just looking for abandoned buildings anymore. I'm looking for places that are being rebuilt, communities that are healing, stories about people who chose to tear down the walls instead of hiding behind them. I smiled. Turns out there are a lot of those stories. People just need someone to notice. Your subscriber count is over 2 million now. I know. Weird, right? Not weird. Earned. Rosie hugged me. Thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting me, for believing the truth mattered. A bark made us both turn. Rusty was sitting near the memorial, his tail wagging. He'd gained weight since I'd started feeding him regularly. His coat was shiny, his eyes bright. He looked like a dog who'd finally found home. He's really staying with you? Rosie asked. Apparently. I tried to find him a proper home, but every time I took him somewhere else, he'd show up at my motel the next morning. I walked over and scratched behind his ears. I think he appointed himself my guardian. Can't seem to shake him. Maybe you're not supposed to. I knelt beside Rusty, and he licked my face enthusiastically. This dog who'd lived for years at a cursed terminal, guarding secrets he couldn't understand, who'd led me to the hollow wall, who'd stayed with me through everything. Maybe not, I agreed. That evening, I stood at the edge of town where the old terminal had been. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. Construction equipment sat silent for the day. Tomorrow they'd start again. Building, healing, moving forward. I set up my camera on a tripod and hit record. This is Lydia Cross, and this is the final chapter of the Dry Creek Junction story. 6 weeks ago, I bought an abandoned bus terminal for 30 cents. I thought I was buying a quirky renovation project, a way to jumpstart my struggling vlog, a way to prove I could turn something forgotten into something valuable. I paused, collecting my thoughts, but what I found instead was a truth that had been buried for 30 years. $28 million in stolen highway funds, 4 murdered workers, generations of officials who chose comfort over justice, who chose silence over truth, who built walls not to protect but to hide. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the empty lot, and I learned something important. Some walls aren't built to hold us in. They're built to hold the truth until someone's brave enough to break them open, until someone's willing to look at what's been hidden and say, this matters. These lives mattered. This truth matters. Rusty sat beside me, leaning against my leg. People keep asking me what I found in the walls. They want to know about the money, about the scandal, about the bodies, but that's not what I found. What I found was a town that had been dying slowly, poisoned by secrets it couldn't speak. And I found people like Rosie Tran, who'd been carrying grief and questions for 3 decades. People like Marjorie Holcomb, who'd been crushed under the weight of complicity. I looked directly into the camera. What I found was that truth, no matter how terrible, is always better than comfortable silence. That exposure is better than rot. That breaking open the walls and letting the light in is the only way anything ever heals. Behind me, the last of the sunlight glinted off the memorial stone. So this is my promise to you. I'm going to keep finding these stories, keep documenting the places where people chose courage over comfort, keep showing you that America's forgotten corners are full of people who are brave enough to face the truth, no matter what it costs. I smiled at the camera. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for believing that truth matters more than comfort, that justice matters more than convenience, that the forgotten deserve to be remembered. I ended the recording and sat down in the dust, Rusty beside me. My phone buzzed with notifications, messages, comments, people from all over the country who'd watched my videos, who'd followed the story, who'd been changed by it in ways I was only beginning to understand, but I didn't check them. Not yet, for now I just sat in the desert dust, watching the stars emerge one by one, watching the place where a terminal had stood, where secrets had been buried, where truth had finally, painfully, impossibly broken through. Rusty rested his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears and whispered, "We did it, buddy. We broke open the walls." He wagged his tail in agreement. And in the distance where the new community center was rising from the ruins of the old terminal, I could see lights turning on one by one. Workers on night shift. People choosing to build something transparent and honest from the rubble of corruption, choosing truth over comfort, choosing healing over silence, choosing to remember instead of to forget. And I knew, sitting there in the Nevada dust with a dog who'd survived decades of secrets, that this was just the beginning. There were more forgotten places out there, more buried truths, more stories that needed to be told, and I was ready to find them. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.